Well, welcome everybody. It's good to see you all. We're jumping into a brand new teaching series today. I always love these weeks when we get to kick off something new, and I'm going to give you one guess as to what we're going to talk about. Over these 3 weeks, we've got green lights washing the stage, and we thought we'd have George Washington and Benjamin Franklin stare through your soul. Very disapproving, aren't they? We're going to talk about money during these weeks, and I'm going to put your minds at ease right away, especially if you're maybe visiting today, you're a guest, or you're tuning in online for the first time. Maybe you've had bad experiences with church and money in the past. I want you to know that we're not talking about the church and your money today. No, we're talking about you and your money, talking about me and my money, talking about our personal finances. And practically speaking, there's probably no other subject more central to our lives than this issue of money. Money seems to be connected to everything, and I know it's applying to everyone. You can be young sitting in the room right now. You might care about money. Old, care about money. Single, married, kids, no kids. You could be flush with cash today. You could be flat broke. Doesn't matter who you are, where you've come from, even the things that you believe. Money matters. It matters because it is a central player. It is an influence in all of our lives. Money today will be a driving factor behind choices you're going to make. And some of those choices you'll make today and this week about your money may even affect you decades from now. Money determines where we live. It often determines how we live, the schools we attend, the places we go, the jobs we hold. And money has a great impact on our relationships. And that's why we need to talk about money. But money, I recognize, is a sticky subject for some people. In fact, it's a sensitive subject for many people. And the reason being is that when people think about money, their blood pressure can start to rise. There's tension around this subject. For many people, money is a major source of stress. It's a major source of stress. It's a source of worry. It's a source of conflict in life. I looked up some recent statistics, and if I were just looking at the room that I'm standing in right now, I would tell you that half of you are living paycheck to paycheck. Meaning if you don't get a check this week or next week, you're not having any cash to work with. 60% of us in this room right now apparently couldn't handle an unexpected $1,000 expense. The average credit card debt of us sitting here is over $5,000 per person. 1 out of 3 people right now don't have a single dollar saved for retirement. We talk about money, and we know that it's often a number one issue that couples deal with and have to address in marriage. Money can turn parents against their kids, turns kids back against their parents. It can harm and destroy long-standing friendships. We see businesses crumble and fail all of the time because of money challenges. And in the midst of all of this, is it any wonder people are dealing with stress, worry, tension, anxiety when it comes to the issue of money? And I wonder if that's you today. Are you in that place today? You're at a point where your stress level has kind of risen up when it comes to money. Maybe you've made decisions in the past. Maybe you're making some now that are leaving you in a tough spot. Maybe you've seen too many people have problems, too many deals gone bad. Maybe you've seen too many relationships and experienced things that have been broken because of conflict over money. And I think at times we just want to throw our hands up and just say, you know what? Enough is enough. Enough is enough, right? And yet we find ourselves asking the question, is there a better way to handle our money? Because we all want to find a better way to handle our money. And that is the heart behind this series. We want to help you take a step in a better direction when it comes to managing finances. And I'll confess right now, I'm going to preach today, and I'm not a paid money manager. I'm not a financial genius. I'm not independently wealthy. I'm not even codependently wealthy. But the truth is, God can help us in this arena. God is the one that can help us in this arena. God has some very, very important things when it comes to money. And the Bible gives incredible insight about management. And God has provided important voices that we can learn from as we dive in. And so today we're going to jump into the subject, and we're going to look at some advice. We're going to look at some advice that a guy named Paul wrote. Paul, you may know, was one of the earliest church leaders, and Paul wrote many documents that comprise what we call the New Testament portion of our Bible. And he writes to churches, and he writes out to individuals. And today we're looking at a portion of something he wrote to a young leader named Timothy. And let me read this for you to set the stage. He offers this financial advice. Paul writes, "Godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. He goes on to say that those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Paul actually, in his writings, writes a lot about money. Money is a timeless issue, and it was as big of a challenge and as real for the people in Paul's day as it is for us today. And so Paul starts by offering up some financial insight. And I'm going to acknowledge, as we look at what's written on the screen, it doesn't necessarily look all that insightful on the surface, meaning there's nothing in particular that Paul talks about when it comes to money management, right? He's not talking about spending. He's not talking about saving, retirement. He's not about investing in crypto, right? Playing stocks. He's not doing that here, not yet. So Paul's words may not appear to be practically helpful. And yet what Paul shares here, I believe, highlights something that is so essential, so critical when it comes to this issue of money. It's where we have to start, something we have to understand as we jump into this whole subject of money. I'll say it this way. Most of our challenges when it comes to money, they aren't actually about the money. It's not about the money, and that may sound strange. Most of our challenges when it comes to handling our money, it's not actually about the money. Meaning it's not about the dollars and cents of money. No, our challenges when it comes to handling money, it's about our relationship with money. It's our personal connection with the things that we hold in our hand. Now, you've all heard the phrase, I'm sure, from the commercial, what's in your wallet? Right? What's in your wallet? When it comes to money challenges, we don't ask that question first, what's in our wallet? We should start by asking, what's in us? What's in you? What's in me? What is in our hearts? Anytime we ask for money advice, we're saying, hey, how can I spend, right? What's a better way to spend my money? How do I save my money? How do I invest my money? We should all be asking one primary question, which is, how do I relate to my money? How do I relate to my money? It's a first and foremost question, and here's why. Because the answer to that question is what truly drives yours and my financial decision making. That is where it all begins. And learning certain money management techniques, that's a good thing to learn. And we're going to get our hands on some of those as we move through this series. But if we want to walk in the right direction, we start by tackling this question right here. How do I relate to my money? Today, next week, we're going to address a couple of larger, I'm going to call them overarching heart issues, that if we don't pay attention to them, they will derail us. They will perpetually put us in a bad place, in a bad way when it comes to money. And as we look at handling our money well, the truth is we're going to have to push back against some things that live in us. And that starts today. We're going to start by addressing one of, if not the greatest enemy, the most common challenger that would stand against you and I and our ability to find peace when it comes to money. And that's what Paul referenced as he's talking to Timothy. He alludes to it 3 times. Look back at what he says. He says, those who want to get rich fall into temptation. Does he say that those who are rich? No, he says those who want to get rich fall into temptation. He goes on to say, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Many people have heard it said that money is the root of all evil. Is money the root of all evil? No, the love of money is actually the root of all kinds of evil. And some people eager for money, not people that have money, people that are eager for money. They've wandered from faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Paul identifies the greatest cause of strain, the greatest cause of stress relative to money. And the issue is summed up with one word: want. Want is a tremendous, tremendous challenge. Money challenges start from a place of want that often lives deep inside of us. And so if we're going to manage our money in a better way, we've got to deal with want. The problem with want is that it runs very deep in our veins. It is in many ways hardwired into us. It's hardwired into us. We all have it. We never have to be taught to want for things. That's the great thing about it. We never have to learn it. It just comes so naturally, right? I remember being a kid and I loved Christmas. And the reason I loved Christmas, because every year we would get a Sears catalog. Some of you laugh because you're old enough to know what a Sears catalog is. All right, it's actually printed, bound. It's like an actual book. You hold it in your hands. Yeah. This thick, heavy, full color, right? Entire catalog that Sears would put out every year, and I only cared about one section, the toy section, right? Love that thing, and I would sneak that thing away to my room, and I would start circling things, and I would highlight things, and I would make notes, and I would dog-ear pages, and day after day I would pore over the same things, and then I would just leave it lying around the house. Hoping, right? Hoping maybe mom and dad would get a subtle hint, right? And I got some of the stuff in the catalog. Not everything, but I got some of it. But I remember every year it was so fun to go through the exercise because it was fun to dream. It was fun to imagine. It was fun to want. It was fun to want. And I'd like to think we just get older, right? We get older, we get more mature, and we grow out of this need to want things. But for some reason, that hasn't taken place. In fact, it feels like just the opposite. Sometimes the older we grow, the more want grows with us. The truth and the reality is this: the world that we live in, this culture that we're a part of, it actually prompts us to want more and more. Every day, every week, every year. Think just on an average day. Just think about how much advertising we're exposed to in an average day, right? Print ads, magazines, billboards. You're going to watch commercials on TV. You're going to get email offers. You're going to get internet pop-ups on your screen today, all aimed at encouraging you to want something that you probably don't currently have. Right? There are marketing departments and sales departments. They're going to be hard at it tomorrow morning, trying to feed off that inclination to want. They're going to target you in different ways. Men, if you like to watch sports, guess what? They know that, right? And so if you watch sports, they're going to sell you things. They're going to sell you alcohol and watches and technology and cars and all of these other things that are going to make you more successful and more manly than you could ever hope to be. It's remarkable. Women, they know who you are. They know what you watch. They know what you stream. They customize ads based on your internet searches. You look for it today, you're going to see it tomorrow. I mean, you just say something out loud. You know what? Alexa knows you want it. And Alexa will probably order it for you. The only problem is Alexis is flat broke. She's not buying it, right? We're made to feel like whatever it is they're putting in front of us is something we've got to have. And we build our lives off comparison. We live our lives so relative to other people. We just look around the room. If you're watching online right now, you see your neighbors and your friends, and we look at what it is they have, and we compare what we have to what they have, and we want to make that comparison and get a hold of what it is that makes them great. That's why social media, while it's amazing, is dangerous at times. Social media is like a marketing scheme, right? You go on there, you're like, man, that's a nice house. And then I see their car, and I see their trip, and I see their makeup, and I see all these things. And it triggers in us this very simple, very natural, hardwired response. I want that. Want. And want, unchecked want can be a dangerous thing. And it's actually the root. It is the root of so many of our challenges. Paul rightly says it. He says, those who want to get rich, man, they fall into temptation. It's a trap. Foolish, harmful desires. You've seen this, right? It plunges people into ruin and destruction. He goes on to say, man, too much want, unchecked. People wander from their faith. They pierce themselves with many griefs. The result of want, unchecked in our lives, it is turmoil. It is conflict. It is strain. It is tension. The reason why is money. Money, money, money. It always competes for a place of dominance in our lives. Always. Money, if we let it, will hold us hostage. It will govern all of our decision making. It's going to set all of our schedules, and it'll supersede our relationships. Money, at the end of the day, if we don't rule it, guess what? It rules us. It does. And so if we want to handle our money in a better way, this is where we start. We push back against want that is always pressing in on us. We need to get reoriented. We need to move in a new direction. We need to figure out how to step away from want. And Paul gives us some direction. He says, I want you to step away from want, and I want you to step towards something else. He said, I want you to learn to be content. Paul says, step away from want, push back against that, and try to figure out how to move over here to the contentment aisle. He starts this entire section talking about the pitfalls of money by saying, contentment is great gain. That's where he starts. He says contentment is great gain. And contentment is to be at peace. It is to be at peace. It's to be settled. It's come to money with this idea of less strain, less angst, less worry, no constant press for more. And if you felt that way in your life and in your heart, you'd probably say the same thing. Yes, contentment would be great gain. It's a step in the right direction. The problem is stepping toward contentment is a tremendous challenge because we can't undo want just by wanting to. You cannot undo want just by wanting to. It's not just a decision. If it were a decision, we'd make it. It's not a decision, it's a process. Contentment is something you actually have to develop and sometimes redevelop and cultivate. Contentment is something that ultimately has to be learned. It is a learned trait. And Paul actually tells us that as well. He talks not only to Timothy, Paul writes a letter to the church in Philippi, and he talks about this issue of contentment, and he says, I have learned to be content. Paul himself was a man who said, I have to learn to be content, but he's learned it. He said, I've learned to be content, whatever the circumstance. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. He said, I've learned the secret of being content. We've got an insider who has been down this road before. Listen, we're born with this disposition to want. That comes natural to us. But contentment is not necessarily natural, and it's not easy. Contentment is something we have to learn. It's about intentional reorientation. And Paul helps because he serves as a bit of an example of someone who learned to be content. You and I can learn it. You and I can learn to be content. And Paul starts off by reminding us something very, very important that he's learned and something he's recognized. Paul rightly acknowledges right up front that our contentment isn't directly tied to our bank account. Our contentment is not directly tied, meaning it's not linked directly to our bank account. Finding peace with money, it's not just about accumulating more resource. Contentment doesn't grow when we get more, and contentment doesn't have to decrease when we have less. That's what he's saying. No, contentment's about pressing toward a peace-filled heart regardless of how much or how little you have. And Paul was a guy that sometimes had a lot and he sometimes had a little. He said, I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. Whatever the circumstances. He said any and every situation. The contentment we're talking about is not situational. It's not circumstantial. It's not about resource, not directly tied to our bank account. Paul says, man, I've been in need, but I've had plenty. He said, man, there's times I'm well fed. There's times that I am hungry, but I've learned to be content in the midst of all of that, in any of those circumstances. We don't necessarily become content just because we get what we want. It doesn't work that way. Feeding want, it's not actually the secret to contentment. I'm reminded of this. I think about it back to my early days of marriage. I've been married almost 25 years, and I look back at where my wife and I started. Like many of you, when you started your marriage, we started off with very little. We'd come out of school. We were still paying down student loans. At that time, we had no health insurance at that point. Low-paying jobs. We rented this small kind of one-bedroom basement apartment. No washer and dryer. We had one car. And so we had a lot of togetherness. We just drove each other everywhere. And our diet was a lot of macaroni and cheese and stovetop stuffing. Carb load, right? And we'd eat out once a week. Once a week was our treat. We'd go out and eat dinner, and we'd split a meal, probably cost less than $12. But here's why I say that, because I look back now. I really do. I look back now and I think to myself, I was every bit as happy. I think every bit as content in those moments 25 years ago as I am today. And some of you know that to be true in your own lives, if you really stopped and looked at it. Reminds me contentment, not just in my marriage, contentment in so many areas of life. They're not directly tied to how much more resource we get. And I stand here today with so much more resource. I do. I have so much more in my hands, in my bank account, in my wallet than I did 25 years ago. You know what I don't have more of, commensurate with how much more I have resource-wise? I don't have that much more contentment. I don't. In fact, more often than I care to admit, want all the things I wanted along this journey. And I've wanted a lot of things on the journey. All the things I got along the journey, and I got a lot of things along the journey. The truth is they haven't necessarily improved things. In fact, many times when I get the things that I want, and some of you know this to be true, you get the things you want, and you know what it leaves you? Wanting. It's like salt water. It's fool's gold. Our contentment is never directly tied. It is not correlated to our bank account. And that's one of the reasons want is so hard to shake in our life, is because we fundamentally believe, we do believe that if we would just get a little bit more of what we want, not all of it, maybe just a little bit more of what we want, we'd be better off. And if I could get my hands on it, I would be happier and I would be more settled. But getting what we want doesn't necessarily move us toward that place of contentment. Resources in our hands by nature don't always fix our problems, do they? They don't change our circumstance for the better. Getting more money doesn't always add value to our relationships. Believe it or not, more money doesn't immediately make you a better parent. Wealthy parents don't make for better parents necessarily. It's not about that. More money doesn't necessarily mend relationships in your family. It doesn't necessarily restore old friendships. More money doesn't make us better people, and it doesn't add more peace to our hearts. It can't do that. Getting what we want ultimately doesn't get us where we want to go. And that's the trick to it. Paul rightly says, man, remember, recognize contentment. It's not directly linked to the bank account. It's not about how much you have. It's not about how little you have, because money is not the ultimate determiner of what's inside you. But Paul does turn his attention and he says, hey, I have found a different source for contentment. I have found something that helps me move down the track of finding peace when it comes to my money. Paul said, I've learned the secret. He said, I found it. Isn't that great? He says, I learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, well-fed or hungry, living in plenty or living in want. And he goes on to say, I can do all this through Christ, that is Jesus. I can do all of this through Jesus, who gives me strength. At the end of the day, there is something for Paul about his connection with Jesus that changed everything. There's something that changed everything. Paul is saying his ability to be content in any and every situation. Look at what he's talking about here. You've heard this verse probably used if you've been around church for all kinds of things. I can do anything I want with Jesus. No, he's saying, I can do all this. What is this? I can live contented whether I have a lot financially or little financially. That is specifically what he's talking about. I can do all of that because I have a connection with Jesus. There is something about a connection with what Jesus is, what he's done, and who he is that changes everything. And Paul had searched for a long time for the thing that he wanted, but ultimately he didn't ever get contentment until he figured out what he needed. And what he needed was a connection with Jesus. There's a backstory in the Bible, and you can read it if you want to, but for much of Paul's life, he chased after a bunch of things. Paul was a guy who chased things. He was educated. Paul was an educated man. He was an intelligent man. He was a driven man. He was successful. He was influential. And at a stage of his life, very, very powerful. Paul climbed up a lot of hills. He climbed a lot of ladders. He reached a lot of the apex that he was searching for. But along that journey, God actually interrupted Paul's life in a pretty dramatic way. God interrupted Paul's life, and he had an epiphany. God revealed to him that while he had so much of what it is that he had wanted, so much of what he had chased after, you know what he had? He lacked in what he needed. That's what he was lacking. And contentment never comes when we find what it is we want. We step toward contentment when we figure out what it is we actually need, what we really need. Paul came to recognize that what he needed most, or what he needed more of, was a connection to God, a relationship with Jesus. You see, Jesus for Paul did what no other person, no other thing, no other pursuit, no other amount of resource could ever do. Jesus actually offered Paul an opportunity to be right standing with God for the first time in his life. That's the offer. Through Jesus' death, his burial, his resurrection, Paul was offered a chance to have a clear conscience. To have a clear conscience and to have a lasting, secure future. God showed up and gave Paul grace. He gave him forgiveness. He gave him new purpose. He gave him new life. And Paul placed his faith in that. And what he did was get set free. See, there's no truer and more satisfying peace, true peace in our hearts, than knowing that we are secure and rightly connected with who God is. Paul didn't know he wanted it until he figured out he needed it. And when he found it, it changed everything. You see, Paul learned that there was a true contentment, and it started by having that right connection with Jesus. He could track down all the things he wanted, but he could never manufacture what he really needed most, to know that he was on right footing with God. God gave him that, a true, lasting peace in his heart that he was looking for. And when God put some of that peace in his heart, you know what it affected? It affected his relationship with money. because Paul's relationship to God and who he was directly affected how he saw the value of his resource. It affected how he handled his money. He was content whether he had a little or whether he had a lot because he had what he needed. And the same thing can be true for you and I today. The author who writes to the Hebrews says it very well, sums it up, says, keep your lives free from the love of money. In other words, push back from want, push back from that. Keep your lives free from the money. Content with what you have. Why? Because God has said, what? I'll give you more? No, because God says, I will never leave you. I'll never leave you. I will never forsake you. Man, we have to learn to be content. We have to learn this. And the presence of God in our lives, it's a pivot point for us. It's a source of strength. It is something that helps us live out a contented life. God promises to be with us, to never leave us. It is a lasting promise of peace, regardless of what's in our hands. And as we sit here today, the question certainly is, do you have that kind of peace, right? Are you still searching out that kind of peace, regardless of where you are? And some of you might say right now, yeah, I'm connected with Jesus. I've got that. I've figured some of that out. I've made that decision. Some of you are like, I'm not so sure about that. I'm somewhere in that process. I'm in that journey. Others of you are like, I don't know. You lost me. Somewhere along the line, you said Jesus. I blacked out. I don't know. Right? But some of you are listening and you're tuning in today and you recognize that there's peace to be found and you're searching for it. You're looking for it. And you might be right now where Paul has been all those years, right? Trying to fill up your life with all kinds of stuff. Maybe at one point you did fill it up with Jesus, but you're back to realizing, no, I'm chasing things. I'm trying to get what it is that I want. And if I think I can just get what I want, just a little bit more of it, maybe, just maybe, that will fix it, right? Just maybe that will fill the void. And that's where so many people live day after day. I would encourage you, I would implore you, start exploring more and more who Jesus is and what he's done. There is something about having a right connection with Jesus that will affect the way we live contented lives. And if you haven't started exploring, start exploring. If you are exploring, keep asking questions. Keep looking for answers, because the truth is, if you ask for answers, you're going to find out that God's promise, it is true for you. God's love is unconditional. His grace is readily available. And the truth is, the work of Jesus is unchanging. It is unchanging. And as you look at the death and the burial and the resurrection of Jesus, you recognize God will never leave you, never forsake you. God may interrupt your life and set you free. And that is a heart of contentment. Contentment never comes easy. It doesn't. It never comes easy. It is something that we have to find. It's about settled, peace-filled hearts. It's not about getting everything we want. It's recognizing God has actually provided what it is that we really need. Because at the end of the day, how we relate to God, how you and I relate to God, actually has a direct bearing on how we relate to our money. And handling our money, it's not about what's in your wallet. It's not about what's in our wallet. It's about what's in us. It's about what's in you. It's about what's in me. That's why we start with this question: how do I relate to my money? It's the first and foremost question. But you ask that question, it gets hard, because we're going to have to push back on some things. You're going to find some stuff that lives in here that we have to push back against. And today we start by pushing back against want. You're going to walk out these doors, and you know what? The world's going to keep pushing you to want for things. It will. That's what's going to happen. They're going to keep pushing you to find meaning and value in your money. You're going to keep seeing opportunities to compare yourself to everybody else around you so that you can want what it is that they want. And some of you just need to be encouraged. Maybe you've hit that point where you're just going to look up and say, you know what? Enough is enough. Enough is enough. I am no longer going to live a slave to my money. And I am not going to let want drive the bus. Man, we push back against want. Think about this for a moment. What could happen if want didn't actually live center stage in our lives? What would happen if want for things was not the dominant factor in how we made decisions, how we handled money? Would it change the way you and I think about money? Would it change the way you spend your money? If want wasn't an issue for you at the time, if you were pushing back against it, would it change the way you budget your money? Would it change the way you give your money and who you'd be generous with, right? If you push back from want, would it change your schedule? Wouldn't it change your schedule? and shift some of the things you put your time to, put your attention to, put your energy to. If you push back from want, would it free you up from tension and stress and angst in your life? And I'll tell you what, if you found a place of contentment, would it not affect the way you relate to the people around you? Would it change the way you relate to your spouse, your friends? Would you be less argumentative? Maybe be more available as a parent? More connected in your kids' lives? Maybe you'd be a better coworker, more approachable, more appreciable, more settled. Listen, contentment. Contentment, Paul got it right. It is great gain. Godliness is good, but godliness with contentment is great gain. What would contentment do for you? I think when it comes to money, if you were truly content, it would change everything. I think it would change everything. And that's where we start. That's where we start. And we'll keep pressing forward. We're going to find better ways to handle our money. We'll pick it up there next week.